Hi folks, Dr. P here, and I'm going to give you a list of the top 11 reasons, 10 plus a bonus, why a game might sell poorly. Now this is going to be more from the point of view of tabletop than video, but much of it will apply to video as well. Now games are products, they're not just games. A lot goes into a game product, not just how a game plays. It's no longer, if it ever was, a meritocracy of design. That is, it's not nearly enough just to have a game that plays well or even very, very well. So I've made a list of what can cause a game to sell poorly. This is important for designers, not just publishers. Yes, you design a game, but it also needs to be marketable. And publishers don't do much to sell games anymore. In most cases, the designer has to do it. And of course, for self-publishers, many of these reasons apply. So I have a list of 11 reasons in no particular order, and I'll talk about each one. Bad physical production. This one is obvious, but designers have little control over this, barring being self-publishers. If the physical game is out of whack in any way, word of mouth may be negative. And of course, what's acceptable to one audience may not be acceptable to another. Think, for example, of the half-inch cardboard wargame counters that are acceptable to a lot of wargamers, but would not be acceptable in a non-war game generally. Audiences make a difference. And of course, the chaos can happen, can be contributed to by overseas production. I remember a case where a gent was kickstarted double six dice, which were 12-sided dice, numbered 1 to 6 twice. And he was getting them tested for manufacture in China. And they weren't doing very well in China. And finally they sent him some more samples, and they had hand sanded the dice to make them better. And he didn't find this very acceptable, but unfortunately, they'd already produced half the lot that he wanted. And they had his money, and it was China, so there was nothing you could do about it. Now, I got some of these dice, and they seemed to be fine, so it worked out in the end. But that's the kind of bizarre things that can happen with overseas production. And of course, the worst thing you can have with bad physical production is a game that's too expensive for what it is. You know, if it's, people look at it and say, well, that's a $40 game, just looking at the components, and people do that nowadays. It's kind of dodgy, but they do. And it's priced for $60, then they're not going to want to buy it. Another reason is bad or limited distribution. People can't buy a game if they can't find it in a store or online. And of course, some won't buy online, although I suspect that's less common than it used to be. One reason why crowdfunding is popular is because almost all the sales may be via the Kickstarter or some alternative such as GameFound. But sometimes you can get a different kind of bad distribution with crowdfunding. It depends. Another reason, the box cover, where the cover comes into play, is poor. There's an old truism in bookselling that a bad novel with a good cover will sell, while a good novel with a poor cover won't sell. And this applies to some extent, perhaps a great extent, to game sales in stores, and even online. What you see online is the box cover. When I was talking about this with my wife, she told me putting a dog on the cover of a mystery novel is a good selling point. What does a dog have to do with it? Well, it just is. Another reason is bad gameplay, but this is less now than formerly. You'd think the quality of the actual play would be important, and it is for games that might become popular. But those are few. Most games are designed to be played only 1 to 3 times, and just once for video. So when people buy a game to play it once or a few times, gameplay quality matters less than it does when they expect to play, say, 25 times or more. There can be serious disagreements between the publisher and the creators. This includes publishers screw up the game and publisher fails to meet obligations. Now, sometimes that doesn't affect the game itself, but sometimes it does. And of course, ultimately, if there's a disagreement between the creators and the publisher, it may result in the game not being published at all. There can be a bad contract between the publishers and creators. This still happens a lot. Of course, you can sign a contract with a publisher, but that does not obligate them to publish your game. Let me say that again. It does not obligate them to publish your game. It's just a promise. The contract does tie you up. So the contract needs to include a time limit. And an advance against royalties is even better, so that if it doesn't get published, at least you've got some money out of the deal. Again, many of these problems don't affect how the game sells, but some may do so. A game can be marketed to an inappropriate audience. Example, my multi-sided game Sea Kings 2015, a Viking game, is a mildly educational mess with your friends, an introductory game, not a game for wargamers. It has been popular with teenage boys and with people new to opposed gaming. It's funny to watch the reaction of somebody who hasn't played an opposed game where a player plays a card on the other player and the player is startled and says, "You did that to me?" But then they get into it and want to do that back to the other person. Unfortunately, the game was marketed to wargamers. And that's not necessarily the kind of game wargamers want, but also it was too expensive for the proper market. It was a $60 game in a market that wanted $40 games. Failure to think about marketing while creating the game. Some characteristics in a game make it harder to market. For example, abstract games with no story are harder to market because story is a major marketing tool. Many Euro-style board games have stories tacked on despite being abstract. They just fake it in order to sell the game. Among those characteristics, of course, a major one is the price. If you design a game that is going to cost the publisher a lot of money, so they have to sell it for $100, and the market is expecting $75 games, you've got a big problem. Part of this comes from 2D versus 3D. 3D pieces cost a lot more, of course. Even the weight of the box for a tabletop game can make a difference. You'd think people would be buying a game for the gameplay, but they don't know what the gameplay is, so they pick up the box, and if it's light for the price, they don't want it. If it's heavy for the price, they think they're really getting something. It's weird, but marketing is weird. Bad timing. Whether it's a game, a song, a TV show, or some other creative endeavor, bad timing can doom it. For example, with a game, if a similar game is released at the same time, nor is there much, if anything, you can do about this. Timing is part of the reason some movies are delayed a year or more. What might have been a hit if released one time falls flat another time. And we've seen examples of this in popular songs that were released twice. The first time they just disappear. The second time they become a hit. What the heck happened? Well, it's luck and timing. And that brings us to bad luck. There's the old question, would you rather be lucky or good? I'm the sort of person who wants to be good, not relying on luck. But I have to admit that lucky often counts for more, especially in game publishing. The biggest problem of all, in many ways, is discoverability. If someone doesn't know your game exists, how can they buy it? And of course, if they can't even buy it, they can't play it either. An example is my game's Hastings 1066. The publishers thought it was brilliant. I got a rave review from Marco the Wargame reviewer. The game's very simple and has a very low price point, and it disappeared with really weak sales. Nobody knew about it, I guess you'd say, or not enough people. Your list could be different, but I hope this will be a warning and guide for aspiring designers. Thanks for listening.